Imagine wearing a watch that costs more than a luxury mansion. A watch so expensive that losing it for just a few minutes could mean losing millions of dollars. For most people, a watch tells you the time, but for billionaires, some watches are something completely different. They are pieces of history, engineering masterpieces, rare works of art, and sometimes multi-million-dollar symbols of power. And the shocking part? Some of the world's richest people don't just own one expensive watch, they own entire collections worth millions. If you want to see how billionaires spend their unbelievable fortunes and discover the hidden luxury behind their lifestyles, subscribe to Explain TV, because today's story is about to get seriously expensive. Let's begin. 1. Elon Musk, the billionaire who doesn't need a $10 million watch. When you think about billionaire luxury, Elon Musk probably isn't the first person who comes to mind. His lifestyle is actually quite different from the traditional billionaire image. Musk has famously shown interest in technology, space, electric vehicles, and futuristic ideas rather than traditional luxury. But that makes the watches associated with him even more interesting. Instead of constantly showing off multi-million-dollar timepieces, Musk has been seen wearing relatively modest watches compared with his enormous wealth. And that's the first lesson of billionaire watches. The most expensive watch isn't always the one the billionaire wears every day. For some billionaires, the real value isn't in showing everyone how much money they have. It's in owning something almost nobody else can get. And that brings us to a completely different world of luxury, a world where watches can cost hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. 2. Jeff Bezos. From books to billion-dollar luxury. Jeff Bezos built one of the world's largest companies from a simple idea: selling books online. Today, his fortune allows him to own some of the world's most extraordinary luxury items. But billionaire watch collecting isn't simply about buying the most expensive model available. Collectors look for something much more difficult to find: rarity. Because when a watch is produced in extremely limited numbers, its value can increase dramatically. A billionaire can walk into a luxury store and buy an expensive watch, but money alone cannot always buy a truly rare timepiece. Sometimes you have to wait. Sometimes you need connections. And sometimes the watch may already be owned by another collector who has no intention of selling. That's what makes the world of elite watch collecting so fascinating. 3. Bernard Arnault. When luxury itself becomes a business. Now let's talk about someone who understands luxury better than almost anyone. Bernard Arnault, the chairman and CEO of LVMH, the luxury empire behind brands such as Louis Vuitton, Dior, Bulgari, Tag Heuer, Hublot, and many others. For Arnault, luxury isn't simply a hobby, it's an entire business empire, and that gives him a unique relationship with the world of watches. Because luxury watches aren't just accessories, they represent craftsmanship, heritage, exclusivity, and status. A mechanical watch can contain hundreds of tiny components working together without electronics. And at the highest level of watchmaking, some pieces can take months or even years to develop. This is where the price starts making more sense. You're not simply paying for the time, you're paying for engineering, craftsmanship, materials, history, and scarcity. 4. Jay-Z, a watch collection worth millions. Now we move from billionaires to one of the world's most influential luxury collectors. Jay-Z, the rapper, entrepreneur, and businessman, has become famous for his taste in extremely expensive watches. His collection has included some of the biggest names in haute horlogerie, and this is where things get crazy. A billionaire, or multi-millionaire, can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a watch without thinking twice. But some collectors go even further. They look for watches that are so rare that their value can rise dramatically after purchase. Imagine buying a watch for a few $100,000 and years later discovering that collectors would now pay significantly more for it. That's when a luxury watch stops looking like an accessory. It starts looking like an alternative collectible asset. 5. The real monsters. Patek Philippe. If there is one name that repeatedly appears near the top of the luxury watch world, it's Patek Philippe. The Swiss manufacturer has produced some of the most complicated and valuable watches ever created, and the brand has a legendary reputation among collectors. Why? Because Patek Philippe doesn't simply focus on making watches that look expensive. The company is famous for extremely complicated mechanical movements. We're talking about functions such as perpetual calendars, minute repeaters, chronographs, and astronomical complications. Some watches can take years of development and extraordinary craftsmanship. And when a watch is produced in extremely limited quantities, collectors can become obsessed with owning it. This is why certain Patek Philippe watches have sold for millions at auction. And we're not talking about a diamond-encrusted fashion accessory. We're talking about a mechanical machine small enough to fit on your wrist. 6. Richard Mille, the watches that look like spacecraft. Then there's Richard Mille. If traditional luxury watches look like pieces of classic jewelry, Richard Mille watches look like they came from the future. They're large, they're technical, they're instantly recognizable, and they're extremely expensive. Richard Mille became famous for using advanced materials and highly complicated movements. Some models can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. The rarest pieces can go far beyond that, and this is one reason celebrities, athletes, and ultra-wealthy collectors love them. They're not designed to disappear under your sleeve. They're designed to be noticed. But there's an even more interesting question. Why would anyone spend millions on something that tells the same time as a $20 watch? The answer is simple, because at this level, the time is almost irrelevant. 7. Why billionaires pay millions for a watch. Think about a $20 watch. It tells the time. Now imagine a $2 million watch. It also tells the time. So what's the difference? It's not accuracy. It's not usefulness. It's the story. A rare watch can represent decades of craftsmanship. It can contain an incredibly complicated movement. It can be produced in tiny quantities. It can have a connection to a famous person. And sometimes, it can become a piece of horological history. That's why collectors don't necessarily ask, how expensive is this watch? They ask, how rare is it? And that's a completely different game. 8. The $31 million watch. Now we reach one of the most extraordinary watches ever sold. The Patek Philippe Grandmaster Chime reference 6300A. In 2019, a unique version created for the only watch charity auction sold for approximately $31 million US. Think about that number. $31 million for a wristwatch. That's more than the price of many private jets, more than multiple luxury mansions, and for some people, more than they could earn in several lifetimes. The watch featured an extraordinary number of complications and was created as a unique piece for the auction. This wasn't simply about telling time. It was about owning something that essentially couldn't be duplicated, and that is the ultimate luxury, owning something nobody else can own. 9. The most expensive watches aren't always the best investments. But here's something billionaires and collectors understand. Expensive doesn't automatically mean valuable. A watch can cost $500,000 when new and later lose significant value. Another watch might cost hundreds of thousands and eventually become worth far more. The difference can come down to brand, rarity, condition, provenance, demand, and history. That's why serious collectors spend enormous amounts of time researching watches. They're not simply buying something shiny. They're studying the market. They're studying production numbers. They're studying previous auction results. And they're looking for the next piece that could become legendary. 10. The ultimate billionaire flex. But perhaps the most interesting thing about billionaire watches isn't the price. It's what the watch represents. A billionaire doesn't need a watch worth $5 million to know what time it is. A smartphone can do that. A $20 digital watch can do it. Even a cheap clock on the wall can do it. So why wear a multi-million-dollar mechanical watch? Because luxury isn't always about necessity. It's about identity. It's about craftsmanship. It's about exclusivity. And sometimes, it's simply about being able to own something almost nobody else can. For ordinary people, a watch might be a tool. For collectors, it's art. For billionaires, it can be a statement. A statement that says, I can afford the impossible. And perhaps that's the real reason these watches fascinate us. Because behind every multi-million-dollar timepiece is a story about wealth, ambition, craftsmanship, and human obsession. From Patek Philippe's extraordinary complications to Richard Mille's futuristic engineering to the world's rarest auction pieces, the luxury watch industry has created a world where a tiny object on your wrist can be worth more than an entire building. And the next time you see a billionaire checking the time, remember, you may be looking at a watch, but there could be millions of dollars sitting on their wrist. This is Explain TV, and if you want to discover how the world's richest people spend, invest, and display their unbelievable fortunes, make sure you're subscribed, because the world of billionaire luxury is much bigger than watches.